let's start this episode with some questions to get you thinking about your customers. To get there, let's consider a product that the company that you work for makes. Just one, not all of them, just one product. Now think about what your clients or your customers love about the products and services your company offers. Like, what do they love about this product?
Or maybe you own your own company and you are the creator or one of the creators of that product or service. What do your customers love about your business? And how do you know that your customers love your services or products?
Or maybe you work for a company that's not even selling products. Maybe you work for a government agency or a nonprofit that delivers services. And in that case, what do your constituents think of the services that you're offering? Do they love them? Have you asked them?
And if you have asked, how did you do it? Did you send out a survey? Did you corner them at the end of an automated phone call? Or did you corner them at the corner? How well do you trust the data that you got back? How certain are you of those data points? How representative are those comments? And the reason that we're asking you this is to get you to consider this question. How well do you really know your customers' actual wants? And more importantly, their needs?
I think we've talked about the action intention gap, and I think there is a root in a lack of trust, right? The customer doesn't know what they don't know. And therefore I know better, right? I think there's an ego perspective in that regard.
That's Aransas Savas, an experienced strategist at Stone Mantle, an organization that I've had the privilege of working with while I was at a bank recently. Now, Aransas also leads a podcast called, fittingly, the Experience Strategy Podcast.
Her partner on the podcast is the co-founder of Stone Mantle. His name is Dave Norton. And both of them joined us in this episode for a brief discussion on the importance of experience strategy.
So just what is experience strategy? Is it the same as UX or CX?
Well, Tim, these are questions that we'll tackle with Dave and Aransas. But for now, here's a guide to get us going. Experience strategy produces an experience that will create additional value for both the customer and for the company. Now, Tim, you and I would argue that this fits under the broad umbrella of behavioral science.
But maybe Dave and Aransas might see it differently.
They might. But more importantly, we're going to talk to them about the importance of leveraging your clients as co-creators of your products and services. And that just might bend your mind.
It might. We'll also discuss how experience strategy is not some woo-woo concept, but it's a business strategy first and foremost. It's a short conversation, but it's packed with great ideas. And we think you'll get a new insight or two in the way that you think about your relationships with your customers.
Okay, before we begin the episode, a couple housekeeping things. Okay, first, Tim, we will be doing another round of Tim's groovy listening sessions. Yay!
Yeah.
There will be a link in the notes to a calendar so you can sign up for 30 minutes and you'll get Tim's ear for anything you like to talk about regarding behavioral grooves, behavioral science, maybe the funky glasses that Tim's wears. I don't know. He's there to talk to you, right? He's there to listen to you.
I guess so. Okay, I am. I'm all right. I'm in. All right. But second, on this short list of housekeeping things, Kurt and I have launched Groove Jams. It's a mini series of short video-based conversations with some folks we love shooting the breeze with. Now, Groove Jams are irreverent discussions around a single thought-provoking question. And our producer, Caroline Schaefer, has been having some fun dressing them up with some, well, let's say quirky images. So they're fun to watch. And we hope that you'll find them both interesting and fun.
Yeah, so if you like to see Tim and my face interposed on some colonial dressed people or I don't know, there's some other weird things that Caroline's doing, but it's fun and you'll just have to suffer through the video parts of Tim and me because the reason that we're getting dressed up in those things is we are definitely built for podcasting and not for video.
Agreed to that. Absolutely. That's why we have clever guests to distract our viewers.
Oh, yeah, that's it. That's right. I forgot about those clever guests that we bring in to keep the focus away from us. All right. With that, Groovers, we hope that you sit back and relax with a tall pour of experience strategy on the rocks and enjoy our conversation with Aransas Savas and Dave Norton.
Dave Norton and Aransas Savas, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
It's good to have both of you here. It's been too long of a time since we've been in the same room, and I'm really happy to see your smiling faces today. We start with a speed round, so we want to know from each of you, and we're going to start with Aransas. Do you prefer coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Dave?
I don't drink either.
Ooh.
Love that. Love that. That is fantastic.
We asked that. That is our number one speed round question. And it is amazing to me, the number of different, people. And it's like sometimes coffee, sometimes tea, but there are a wide, not insignificant number of people who drink neither. And that just kind of surprised me and now after 400 plus episodes, it's not as surprising, but anyway. All right. Number 2 in the speed round question. Would you like to vacation in the mountains or at the beach? And Dave, we'll start with you this time.
Definitely in the mountains.
Okay.
We must compliment one another. Definitely the beach.
I'm just curious, Aransas, does a place come to mind? Do you have a favorite beach place?
Well, I'm at the beach as we speak. So I'm down on the Jersey Shore in this magical little town that's a really easy commute to Brooklyn, where my home is. And so the access of that is paramount. But there's just for me nothing like the movement of the ocean and the power of it while also being this incredibly calming force.
Yeah. And Dave, is there a specific mountain location that you like?
Well, first, let me say I do love beaches very much, but I've lived most of my life in mountains. And so spent 20 years in Colorado. I currently live in Utah. And it's just a big part of my life. I was in the mountains this last weekend.
Yeah. See, I would pick a place like Vancouver where I can get the mountains and then go down to the water right away. That would be me. I know it's a cheat.
You want it all, Kurt.
Okay. I want to start with Aransas on this question. Would you prefer to have dinner with your favorite actor or favorite musician?
Oh, musician. Just because of the person.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody come to mind?
Lucinda Williams immediately.
Oh yeah.
Wouldn't that be
She
fun?
would be a super compelling person to talk to, wouldn't she?
Totally. And I feel like after her stroke, she has even more to say and share and a sense of her own mortality. And I just feel like a real seize the moment with her.
For an artist who has been unbridled in so many ways, like the post-stroke Lucinda is like even like just the no filters. It's fantastic.
It's really exciting because I think she's just decided that, she's done hiding everything.
Yeah. Okay, Dave?
Well, I have to say that this is always the part where I fail because remembering celebrity names, remembering musician names, remembering my children's names, it's not my big thing, but I would probably go with an actor. I probably the opposite of Aransas. There's some jazz artists that I would love to, Stacey Kent is one of my favorites.
Wow. Yeah.
But from a celebrity, standpoint, man,
was it the guy that starred in that movie that was about the really
thing?
Cool thing? Was it
that was I just watched it just the last week.
Yeah. Tim knows that because that's how I am, Dave. I am exactly the same. And so Tim is very well versed with that guy that was in that movie that was about that really cool thing.
Does he usually get it for you, Kurt?
If it's research, he does. It is amazing. It's like, remember it was about this. Oh yeah, that was, Dunning and Kruger in 1978 in this paper in this journal. And it's like, how the hell do you do that? I don't get it. But yeah. All right. We have last speed round question. And this is a toss up. So I will throw it out. Either of you can answer here. True or false? Consumer experience trends are easy to spot, so you don't really need to hire a firm to help you with that.
False.
False.
We have consensus. Okay.
Totally in agreement.
Why is that? Let's start with Dave. Why is that completely false?
I don't think that most companies really understand experience strategy or consumer research associated with experience strategy. I think that they know that it's important, but they wouldn't necessarily know why the insight is, they should be paying attention to a particular insight. And I think it takes time and it takes effort to identify the most important experience strategy insights. It certainly has taken me a lot of time. I've dedicated, 30 years of my life to studying experience strategy. And so maybe I'm a slow learner, but I don't think so. Yeah. I think that there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah. Aransas, you look like you've got
I think on both
thoughts.
the macro and the micro level, it's important to have outside perspectives. And so much of our work is designed to get people out of their bubbles so that they stop looking at problems in the same way over and over again and invite in other broader perspectives. And, so relevant to your work, our products are being sold to human beings and they are multidimensional. They are living in multiple environments. They are making thousands of decisions every day. And so to try to understand them through the single decision they're making with your product once a week is absurd.
Yeah.
And so we're really trying to bring the whole human into the view so that people can offer a product that meets the needs of the human within their lives outside of using you.
Aransas, you brought up something there that you said getting people outside of their bubble, right? And I think you're talking from an organizationally perspective, right? We get stuck in this bubble.
Makers.
How, from your perspective, why is that so important? If my bubble is right, why would I need to worry about that? And then B, how do those bubbles get formed?
Yeah. I think when I'm talking about the bubble, what I'm talking about most of the time is the different categories of products and services that exist. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to try to bring together folks who are in banking with folks who are in home building and folks who are in retail and travel. And I'm going to bring them together and I'm going to say, what are you seeing? Because the truth is, at this macro level, humans are evolving constantly. Our needs and preferences and worlds are evolving, and we have to look outside of our own category. But what happens is groupthink, and we get into these little bubbles, and we start spinning our wheels, right? And we're like, maybe, it starts, I think the smallest bubbles are, this is me within my team or function within this organization. And all I'm seeing is this button this customer is supposed to press. And I'm going to obsess over the functionality of that button. Is it working? Is it not? Could it be better? And I'm going to make 1% difference every time I move that button. But ultimately, does that button really matter in the whole? Right. So then we expand a little more, right? And it's like, oh, what about my bubble within my organization? What about my organization within my category? Expanding it even further. What about my category within the world of the customer? Right. And so it's like, that's what I mean when I say expanding and stretching those bubbles.
Yeah. Dave, you've got a thought about that.
As Aransas was talking, it occurred to me that you can actually do the same thing with people when you're studying them. We do a lot of primary research with consumers. And one of the first things that we hear about consumer research is they don't know what they want. And that is true to a large degree. But what you can do is you can take them on a journey, and over a progression, you can, and by treating them like they're co-participants with you in discovering things, they come to some very important insights. And I think that oftentimes we as researchers, we don't allow our customers to actually go on a journey. We don't set it up for them in such a way that they can probe things. You guys are all too young to remember the ZMET, Robert Zaltman's technique that he used. Kurt's like, oh, I might remember that a little bit, but
I have the gray beard and the no hair on top. I've been around for a year or two.
What I liked about the Zaltman method was, you had all of these images that you could look at and talk to. What I didn't like about the Zaltman method is that you would do laddering techniques where you'd go deeper and deeper with them, and then at the end you would tell them what they thought. And I think at least for experiences, I think it's important for them to be somewhat of a co-participant in that, so that they can say, no, maybe I think maybe part of what I was thinking was also about this aspect. And that can be really informing for people. So just a thought.
It's interesting how when we think about having our customers as co-developers, right? That can be very scary for many leaders or organizations. How I mean, in this world that you've just described, Dave, have you done this? And if so, how do you overcome some of that potential hesitation or fear that people might have?
Well, my experience has been that when we try to expand the bubble of our customers, the people that are most afraid are our clients. They're like, they're never going to get this. They're not going to be able to do it. But we have techniques that we use. We use exercises, little activities, little worksheets. We ask them to do an activity and then talk about it and then do the next activity. And it's not until like the third or fourth activity that we're actually collecting any data, because the first couple of activities are just to warm them up, help them to understand. When you're talking about an experience, there's a lot to think about. So you need to warm them up and not go directly for, do you like this or do you not like this? That doesn't really do them any good. But there's a sequence that we try to create for them, so that we're at the end of it, we're starting to get really good information about what they really want.
And is that why you guys do the lightning round, Kurt and Tim?
Yeah. Don't stop giving away like all of our secrets, Aransas. Come on.
It was a happy mistake, but we will definitely, in retrospect, we look back and go, oh, that actually works out really nice of getting people to feel more comfortable, to warm up into the interview that we're doing, to have a little levity about, oh, who would I pick to be that dinner guest, and getting a little bit of that and bringing some human side to these interviews. So, yeah.
Full credit. I mean, I was like, see, this is the genius that happens when you have behavioral scientists making decisions about experiences.
That might be hyperbolic, but I want to, Dave, you talked about this idea that, and Kurt addressed it a little bit, the co-developers, the co-creators, bringing your customers in is something that's scary. Why is it that senior leaders in really big companies are so damn afraid of engaging their customers in meaningful conversation?
Somebody should write the history of that, because I think it has evolved over time.
Okay.
I think early on, there was the contamination fear that by asking them to participate, we were contaminating their first response, that their first response was the most important response. Some of the basic focus group techniques early on, you're leading the witness in the wrong way. There was a lot of training that was done back in the day that said you had to be very, very careful. And I think a lot of leaders kind of bought into that. I think today it's kind of evolved in a different way, where Well, I think somewhere along the line, some people are afraid that if they say something that somehow the company is going to have to respond. Mm-hmm. An extreme version of this is when we do work in healthcare, pharmaceutical companies, if they hear anything negative about, a medication, they have to actually track that legally.
Yeah.
And it has to be reported as a compliance issue. So that's an extreme example of that type of a thing. But I think companies, sometimes leaders are afraid, if a customer brings something up and then it gets some legs underneath it within the organization, but it's a dumb idea. How do I tamp it back down?
Yeah.
So that's an issue in and of itself. Today, there's a tremendous reliance on data that is collected either through survey or through tracking or things of that nature. And there's a question of, well, are they just saying this because my operational data or my web data tells me something completely different, and I trust that because there's so much more of it.
Yeah. Aransas, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about the action intention gap, and I think there is a root and a lack of trust, right? The customer doesn't know what they don't know, and therefore I know better, right? I think there's an ego perspective in that regard. But the truth is, I think it's because we're not asking either the right questions or enough questions. And so if we were to ask follow-up questions, we might actually get to some greater truth to understand the desire and be able to meet the need instead of just, oh, they want a purple house, so we're going to build them a purple house. Why do they want a purple house? What is it about purple houses that are so exciting to them? And how do we meet that need in a way that solves a problem for them? The other thing I want to say, and I'm not sure if this is really helpful or not, but I think there's a lot of ego in a lot of organizations, right? Like we feel like we're smart and educated and we've seen a lot of things and we know a lot of things. And so these customers, do they really know what they, and I feel like it's important to acknowledge just sort of that ego aspect that happens within organizations. People are kind of fighting to prove their worth and value. And so they want to put their own ideas forward. But actually, I think in most cases, what we're seeing is the greatest innovation comes customer up.
Aransas, it's interesting you say that. So I don't do work with consumers typically. We do work with employees though. Mm-hmm. And so the same can be said internally about leaders asking their employees, what do you need from the organization to be more engaged, to be more motivated moving forward? And there's a fear. And part of that is they don't know what they want, and we have, or they don't understand the business enough, and they're going to ask for things and we're not going to be able to give it to them.
Oh, yes, all the time.
And then the ego part of it comes in is, I did that job. I came up through the ranks. I did that. I know exactly what they want, not realizing the world has changed. The context has changed. All of those factors now have an entirely different ecosystem that these employees are working in, and even just different generational or life experiences that these people have gone through that don't always align exactly with what that leader went through. And I think there's a lot to be said for all of that as you're going through there. All right, I'm going to change the topic here, and maybe not change it so much, but bring it into this idea of saying, hey, we're talking about change, but what is the relationship between experience strategy and behavior change? Open it up.
I'll jump in and say that as someone who has worked in the field of experience strategy for 2 decades, I think the most energizing relationships I had in my professional career were with behavior change scientists. And it was because we were able to partner to experiment with our experiences and validate them both based on the knowledge and principles of behavior change, but also through understanding the customer and how they experience a product. And so to me, I think they're inextricably linked and exceptionally valuable to one another. They're incredibly complementary, but they also challenge one another. And there's a bit of rigor that comes from each that isn't necessarily applied to the other in isolation.
Interesting.
Yeah. Dave?
Well, I think that the relationship between experience strategy and behavior change has to do with the fact that we're both focused on what happens to people in real life situations. We're the experienced strategist is trying to design a strategy that will produce an experience that will create additional value for both the customer and for the company, and is going to apply techniques that are oftentimes behavioral techniques. They are techniques that grow out of, everything, that has to do with life in general. So we will use a lot of different techniques. Now, not everything may be behavioral change techniques that we're putting into an experience, but a lot of it will be.
Yeah. Getting back to the companies that are making these decisions, Aransas, I really liked the way you framed fear and ego as being really so central. And it's natural, right? We don't have to throw everybody under the bus for that. This is just who we are as humans. But I'm wondering what you think are sort of the most common pitfalls that executives engage in when it comes to developing their own consumer strategies and customer experiences.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it, and this is something we actively work to counter in our work, again, by getting people out of their bubbles, is we see something work strategically one time, right? Maybe there's a certain style of innovation that is effective in driving up the stock. And so, and I think the same, we could make stock an internal term too, right? It doesn't have to just be, how it trades on the open market. But there's some impact, some type of innovation that proves successful. And so we tend to cycle those again and again and again, right? As human beings, we make so many assumptions that what happens one way is what will happen another way. And I think you see this in organizations over and over, but what ends up happening more often than not is it's like the tire in the mud. You're just digging in the same ruts, and the car, company, team, fill in your word there, gets more and more stuck and harder to dig out.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Kurt, and we want to say thanks for listening to Behavioral Grooves. And we hope that you're enjoying this episode, but it feels a little bit one-sided. You're hearing from us, but we're not hearing from you.
This is Tim, and we have two suggestions to remedy that. The first is join our Facebook page and engage with us.
We want to talk with you. We want to hear your perspectives, and hopefully our Facebook page might be the place to have some of that interaction. So please come and join us.
The other recommendation we have for you is to leave us a quick rating. You know, the little 5-star thing at the bottom of your app? Or a short review. Just leave us a few words about what you like about behavioral groups. We'd very much appreciate it.
Thanks, and we now return you to our regularly scheduled programming.
Dave, thoughts about that?
I think the major pitfall that companies are missing out on and leaders don't understand is that experience strategy is business strategy. And what you're trying to do is to create value for the organization. They have a tendency to say that to think of it as CX, so it's measuring, and that's not what we're necessarily talking about. They have a tendency to think about it as experience design or persona development or different elements, UX. And what senior leaders need to understand is that the customer is buying your experience. I think Pine and Gilmore showed that. And therefore, experience strategy has everything to do with what your brand is doing, what your innovation is doing, what your R&D is doing, what your data scientists are doing. There's so much more that's going on. It's what all of your resources combined are doing to create that experience. And so they tend to get very myopic and focused on one particular aspect. And therefore, they're not able to create the full value for the customer and for the company that they could if they applied the principles more broadly.
That was fantastic for both of you. And I think with that, we are running up into our time slot. But man, we need to, again, just have you guys back on, talk about this, because I think there's a lot of our listeners who are working in organizations and saying, we could do this better and help us with this. And so thank you for being guests on Behavioral Group today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I groove on our conversation with Aransas and Dave and whatever else comes into our customer-loving minds.
Yeah.
You weren't expecting that, were you?
I wasn't.
You were expecting me to do something experience or something.
Yeah.
No, it's customer-loving.
This is what I love about this, that every time we get together to do a grooving session, you never know what's going to come out of Kurt's mouth on this. And so
you never know what's going to come out of Kurt's mouth at any point. There you go. That's the good and bad thing, I guess. So this is interesting though, because I think when we talked about this before we even had, Dave and Aransas on, I wasn't understanding what they did. Right. This was for me, I'm going experience strategy. What is that? I mean, isn't that UX? Isn't that, customer experience? But no, it's not. It is going in and looking at it with a different lens, at least from my perspective. I'd say it is really about kind of getting behind the wheel, right? That if the experience, if I were to use a metaphor, if the experience is what it's like to drive, then the experience strategy is how are we going to create and ideally, and we'll get to this, co-create with the customers what that driving experience should be. It's the strategy behind it. And I think that it's absolutely undervalued in the world of marketing. Well, and I think the big piece here, going back to the customer love part, it really is showing consideration, concern, respect, admiration, what other adjective you want to put on that for your customers, this love part of your customers, to understand that when they're interacting with your product or services, it is the experience that they have that they are going to do. And so how do you develop that? Right. So what Dave and Aransas and their business, Stone Mantle, is trying to do is kind of go from the idea that if I'm going to get on an app or experience a product or use a product, that hopefully that would be time well spent. But they're saying experience strategy could actually lead to time well invested. Like it could be something that's really rewarding, so that there's something inherently rewarding about using that product. So it feels like, Tim, and correct me, but isn't there a bit of semantics there? I mean, a time well spent versus a time well invested.
Yeah, to some degree. But at the same time, I would also say that what experience strategy does is elevates the consumer experience to a strategy and not just a bunch of looking at a specific product within a specific user context. I mean, context matters and all these things matter. But I think that they're kind of taking it up a level, and I think in part because they're concerned about how data can kind of give us the impression that things are going one way and maybe and not another, right? That there's right that we can find data that helps support specific consumer experience points that might mislead us, and that we end up being over reliant on this kind of data. And I think what the experience strategy says, let's step back. Let's actually pull back and not be over reliant on the data. Let's actually talk to our customers, get a direct experience with them, and have a meaningful conversation with them, and avoid sort of repeating the past mistakes of just doing marketing the same way day in and day out.
I will take this and bring in an experience from my work that I've done. So working with a large organization, and they have a employee engagement survey that the company conducted.
A lot of companies have engagement studies,
yeah,
right?
Right. They call them whatever you want to call them, right? There's a bunch of them out there. And we get this data back and we see, 33% of people felt this was positive, 67% felt it was negative, right? And It's like, well, that's pretty bad, and different pieces. And we go into that. But that survey, that data in and of itself is just data points, and you can draw conclusions from that. But what we did is we went in and we did small focus groups of 3 to 4 people, where we talked to everybody and said, all right, so this was rated, only 33% of respondents found that this was a positive aspect. And then we could peel back that layer and understand why. And it wasn't necessarily always the things that you would make assumptions on.
Right.
So the way that we are able to understand, as they say, this, then create a solution to this, is very different than if we would have just gone off of the survey results in and of itself.
Yeah, this is a classic example of the map is not the territory. Right. You get this data back, right? This Alfred Korzybski quote, which I love, but it just reminds us that the data points might not be wrong, but they aren't telling you the whole picture. And
exactly.
You only, right? And if I'm summarizing this, you only got the correct picture, a full understanding, by actually talking, by actually having focus groups and having lengthy conversations with these folks.
And the lengthy part, I think, is important. And it also comes, and I think, this was talked about in the episode as well, is that outside perspective. So and this was obviously internal within an organization. The employees were talking to me or my team who are outside. They're not talking to their leaders who they're going to be a little bit hesitant about talking to. They can be wide open and just as, fully transparent in talking with us. Yeah. And that gave a different, as the client said, we never heard these things before. And I'm like going, well, yeah, it's because nobody's going to say that to your face, right? Nobody's going to tell you maybe you're the issue or not you, the issue, but your behaviors are the issue. And that was important. And so those are big pieces of it.
I love that. That's a great illustration. Another thing I want to take away from this conversation is along the lines, kind of related to this idea of how an employee or a customer might not tell you what the real problem is. There's also within our groups of marketers, within the people who are sitting in the room making the decisions, there becomes a groupthink sort of thing. And this is something that we need to avoid. We need to have trusted associates that were willing to sit in the room and ask important questions like, how do we know that? Like someone's making a comment, a statement about our customers. How well do we know that?
Right. Well, and groupthink is inevitable, right? We know Solomon Asch did the line experiments back in, what was it, the 50s and 60s?
Yeah. 1950s, yeah.
You look at that and the idea that, hey, if 6 of the 7 people in the room are all saying that this line is the longest, even when I look at it, it is very difficult for me to go, I think you're wrong. I think that line B is longer than line A when everybody's saying line A is longer. It's inevitable if you have a cohesion of people who express an opinion about this. And so in this experience, right, when you have 3 or 4 people in this group of 6 that are all of a sudden aligned around a particular, interpretation of either the data or the solution that needs to happen, it's hard for that 4th or 5th or 6th person to all of a sudden say, raise my hand, I disagree. That is, I think, one of the more important elements to take away from this. And then putting in, outside perspectives, or having a person be the, devil's advocate and point out the opposite. There are ways around this. Lots of research has gone into this, and yet we still don't do it because we don't think about it.
Yeah. You also mentioned something that in this consulting gig you were talking about, where it sounded like the employees were actually coming back and saying things that the leadership didn't know, right? That they weren't aware of. Would you consider them co-creators? Because this was something that I really loved in our conversation with Aransas and Dave, is this idea of bringing customers in as co-creators. How does that relate to that project that you had?
Very much so. Not just that project. I mean, this is in multitude of work that we do when we are building in initiatives, or what we would call products or services for internal employees. That the work that we do is you involve them, you help them design, because they're the ones who are using this. They also probably have the best understanding of what are the pitfalls that we're going to run into, and what are the elements of being able to make this work better. So in all of these, and I've done it, and Tim, you've done this as well, when you're working around an incentive program or an incentive plan, how do you get the feedback from the employees themselves, the salespeople, in order to, build that? It's not saying that you're building the incentive plan that the salespeople want. That would be foolish to a certain degree if you're a company.
That's right. That's right.
But they have insights that you may not have.
Yeah.
And so in this last one that we did, when we're putting solutions in place, those solutions were coming from the employees themselves. It is a co-creation that we then tweak.
Yeah. It calls on business leaders to think more holistically. And I think that there's too many business leaders that get into this groupthink, get into this rhythm, get into this status quo bias. This is the way that we do things, and fail to take into consideration all the value that could come from an outside perspective.
And I love the part that you just said, because I've seen this. This is the way that we do things. And too many times in business that it worked. That's why you're doing it. It worked at one point in time.
Yeah, right.
It might have worked for a long period of time.
Yep.
And don't just throw it out because we want to do something new, but have a different perspective to come in to say, is this way that we are building this product, the experience that we are having for our customers, the experience that we are having for our employees, take that viewpoint and say, is this the way that we need to move forward, or do we now need to tweak things up a little bit? And I think that's really important.
I couldn't agree more.
All right. So I think we've probably beat this horse to, what do they say? To death, whatever that is, right?
I'd like to think that we didn't kill the horse.
Okay, all right. We just made the horse really tired. There you go. I enjoyed our conversation with these guys, but I thought it was really, really interesting, and I often love our conversations about business because it's what I do 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, right?
In your real job, in your real day job.
In my real day job, not just this like fun little side project that we have going on here. But I want to add in this, that you can use experience strategy not only to help your company be more successful with your new and existing companies, but it could also help frame your job and your career differently.
Yeah, you could like get outside of yourself and embrace the mindset of co-creation with your products and services, or with your clients, or with your career. Like, you could think about collaborating with your colleagues and friends. Not everything needs to be done alone.
Yeah. Oh, that's just brilliant. That was brilliant. All right. Speaking of not doing it alone, we'd like to thank you for listening to Behavioral Grooves, and we appreciate that you're enjoying, or we're hoping that you're enjoying this episode, but it feels a little bit one-sided. You're hearing from us, but we're not hearing from you, and we need to up our experience strategy.
Nicely played, sir. There are a couple of ways that you could help us do this. The first would be to join our Facebook page and engage with us. Share your thoughts and your feelings, your hopes and your dreams, your deepest desires for the future.
Or you could just talk about the episode and what you learned and what we, if you have other questions, and we can come back, and maybe we could even get Dave and Aransas to come in and give we can have a whole... All right, we got that.
That's probably better. Yeah.
And I think we're going for something that's simple, right? What you liked and didn't like about the episode, what we could learn from the episode, how you could take this, or if you have questions around it, right? The bottom line is that we want to hear from you about your perspective, and hopefully a Facebook page that we have already set up, Behavioral Grooves Facebook page, or I forget what our funky name is. It's not anything really cool. Anyway, that might be a place where some of that interaction might happen.
Yeah. And the other thing, but less significantly satisfying way to engage with us, by the way.
but it's important for us. Yeah.
But you could just leave us a quick rating. The little 5-star things at the bottom of your app. It's just the stars, just like click, 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 and you're just done. Or a short review. Just leave us a few words about what you like about Behavior Grooves. We would so much appreciate it.
So, we have thousands of listeners, Tim, and we only have 100 ratings. We could, that's like not even a 10th of the people, not even the 20th of the people that have listened to this.
But after this, an army of people will be leaving reviews, and you want to count yourself among that army of supporters. So join the Behavioral Grooves army of supporters.
Well done. We have the army of groovers that are out there supporting us. All right. Okay, with that, we hope you take some lessons from experience strategy with you this week as you go out and find your groove.